Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And how much time do we have? 3 hours?
Sure.
Okay, great, because that's all the notes I made. I keep doing this. I keep making these gigantic lecture notes. The other night I was somewhere. Where was I? Somewhere at a dinner, and they had asked me to be the after-dinner speaker, and they had given me 15 minutes, something like that. And I misread the program because it had given, I thought it had given me an hour. It was an hour for the dinner plus the speech. So I began with the Franco-Prussian War.
That's a good
Yeah, I could tell when the organizer, after about 10 minutes, you know how organizers do this, they stand up. Have you ever had to do this? You stand up and you kind of make imposing, a sense of like, we're ready to go, it's time to wrap up. And I just thought, oh, this is the worst experience. I just gave the worst speech. Everybody just wanted a happy speech, and that's it. Which actually we all want happy speeches, right? I mean, there's nothing wrong with a happy speech. So yeah, to prepare for this, I always do this. I had some sense that like, well, tonight, there's a topic I've avoided my entire career, which is I need to develop a robust theory of social change. And I'll present that tonight. But actually, this is probably not the occasion to present my robust theory of social change. And probably there's no occasion to present a robust theory of social change. And probably none of us need to have a theory of social change at all, in fact. What is the relationship between culture, society, the historical moment, and the kind of political world we live in? I don't know, really. Nobody really does, and if somebody does, it's probably unpersuasive, and the history will change again, because we live in an unpredictable world. But I would like to talk to you. Before I do, just a couple of points. First of all, it's a pleasure to be among the libertarians. Right? I mean, it's good. I guess you could say I'm, a little bit, I don't know, maybe I retain some of my, I'm a little bit, well, how should I say? Well, I'm something of a theist, right? So I think that God infuses every person with a little bit of a mission that's a part of your heart and your mind and the way you think. And I always feel like anybody who shows up to one of these events is especially touched in some way. Like, you might not know it, but there's a reason you're here instead of somewhere else, and it's because you have a kind of destiny to be part of something that's big, and that you have a job to do. And so when I'm among libertarians, I always have this. For me, it's an occasion of grace in a sense, because all of you are very special people for that reason, despite all of our differences and everything else. You've seen the need for an ideal, and to dedicate yourself and your time, your reading and your activities to doing something bigger and larger than just what's around you. I mean, all of you carry a vision for what might be, and you're willing to give up your time to do it, without money, and that's really important. And actually, it's people like you who change the world. And I think it's extremely important that we recruit other people of the same bent. By the way, is the microphone just totally wonky? Are we
totally
okay?
Is, yeah. It's not you.
Perfect. It's not you.
It's just a little bit of a static, right? Yeah.
It's a progressive thing.
Okay. Oh, wow, that's better. Right? Yeah. That's right. Okay. So what moment are we living through? And look, every time you give a speech in these days, you have to keep up with the news because everything's changing so dramatically. So let me characterize our political moment just quickly, and I'll work from today backwards, so we can kind of understand what's happening. and I feel like I do understand it. Like, I heard Trump speak in 2015, and I saw the future. I knew everything that was going to happen. You know, that he was going to win, that he was going to trick everybody with tax cuts and deregulation, and then start with this protectionist nonsense, and that his base was going to turn on him because it wasn't going to work, and so on and so on. Right? I mean, it was just, it's so clear because it's just a repetition of history, and I just finished a book on the topic, so it's all just so inevitable to me. But right now, so we have this guy in office who endlessly fascinates all of us, which is to say we're sick of him. Right? Like every day is more Trump news and Trump news. But there's a couple of things that are really central to who he is. And I do not believe that he's, like a lot of people say, has no principles, that he has no theory, that he's just purely about marketing, that he has absolutely no philosophy. I think he does, actually. And his philosophy consists of basically three things. One is that he believes passionately in protectionism as the basis of national productivity. He's always believed this. I mean, like you can see it back in the 1980s. He's warning about the threat of Japan, and so on and so on. And there's certain people who in history have always believed this. You can trace this doctrine all the way back to 19th century Germany. Everything terrible goes back to Germany. Yeah, it's always Germany. But Friedrich List, and if you know your economics, you know that he was an advocate of the mercantile state. And he thought that free trade was dangerous to citizenship and national loyalty because it broke it down. Like, you had to know where your products were from, or else you would start to lose your sense of attachment to the nation and therefore to the nation's leaders. So we needed protectionism. Like, every state should become a self-internally productive unit. That was extremely important to this view. And this view became very attractive in the United States. It's been dropped mostly since World War II, but thank you, Donald Trump brought it back. It was very clear to me from this very speech that protectionism, nationalism, mercantilism, national autarky, whatever you want to call it, which basically comes down to one word, tariffs, which is to say taxes. Okay? You notice everything the government does ultimately comes down to like taxes, right? So that's really important to him. It's been important to every autocrat from the mid-19th century all the way to the present, because these days, I mean, half of every American-made car is actually built is actually foreign. We're so dependent on international trade, and our supply chains are so enormously complex, given the way markets work, that there's no such thing as national production anymore. But Trump believes in it. The second thing he believes in is the physical world. He loves concrete and steel and resents digital commerce, has no interest in the progress we've made over the 21st century, really wants to throw things back to a 1950s style model, which I don't think is viable. And the third thing he believes in, this is actually the most implausible thing of where it won't work. Well, actually none of this stuff works, but so in history you can distinguish two kinds of states. One is a nation state and the other is a personal state. Ancient states were always personal states, by which I mean that if the head of the state dies with him. So you cut off Louis XIV's head and the state's dead. I am the state, he said. That was the personal state. The nation state is a different thing entirely. It emerged basically late 16th century, early 17th century, and the idea of the nation state is that it's immortal. So that the head of the state is a mere administrator, and there's a massive apparatus underneath him. So we change out the administrator, but nothing actually changes about the state. Long live the king, but if the king dies, the state still exists. And we've mostly in the modern era had nation states. So, for example, this is why when the government shuts down, it doesn't really shut down, or when the Congress is in session, the government still works, We have 3 branches of government, except one of them constitutes 98% of it, and it's unelected, This is called a nation state. Well, Donald Trump has never reconciled himself to the existence of a nation state. He really wants a personal state, like Machiavelli describes in The Prince. He wants to be the one guy in charge, which is a very interesting thing to desire to be in a constitutional republic. And you notice he never really talks about the Constitution. It's not really a thing for him. In fact, he's not really interested in any aspect of government except himself, which is fascinating. It's both good and bad. So even after a year, like 2/3, or even maybe as much as 3/4 of the political appointments he was supposed to be making to head the bureaucracies, he's not made, because it's not very interesting to him. Mr. President, we do, after all, need to appoint the Assistant Secretary of State for Economic Affairs, right? He's like, what do we care? Who's that? That guy? No, we don't need that. Why do we need that? We don't need that. And so these jobs are all unfulfilled because he thinks he can just do it all himself. I mean, it's implausible, it's crazy, but it's interesting. And so it's created certain problems in Washington, like very practical problems, because the purpose of the political appointees is to take the fall for all the mistakes of bureaucracy, right? So you've got these permanent bureaucrats there, and their job is to kind of do their job, and if something goes wrong, then the political appointee gets the blame, and they're safe. If they don't have anybody to kind of be their lightning rod within the bureaucracies, they get really risk averse, and then they don't want to do anything, actually. And this is happening in agency after agency: Department of Labor, Department of Transportation, Housing and Urban Development, the Secretary of State, the FBI, the CIA. You just go through the list. Donald Trump's political appointees are rare and short-lived. So it's been a tremendous thing in some way to see the demoralization of the deep state, essentially, in light of Donald Trump. So this is, I mean, in a funny way, despite himself, I mean, he's an authoritarian, he's a would-be tyrant, he's the prince of Machiavelli's book, but in a funny way and almost inadvertently, he's made a massive contribution to the demoralization of the permanent bureaucracy and to the discrediting of statism itself. And you can see this in the progressive press right now, right? They are coming to terms with this terrible reality that this thing that they built is now being run by a man they hate. And what do you do about that? And it's a very interesting thing to see taking place. Mostly, they spent the last year being angry. Hey, this guy shouldn't be president. How dare he? Probably there's some reason he's president, like probably the Russians, or there was there's always something. It was Facebook that did it. Cambridge Analytica. There's always another theory. Why is this guy president? Because the left, the progressive left, can't come to terms with the fact that he even has that he won the election role. And the reason they can't come to terms with it is they can't accept their own failures. They don't accept the fact that Donald Trump was elected because people are fed up with the progressive left, essentially. I mean, that's the core reason. It was anybody but Hillary at that point, And Donald Trump is also sort of entertaining in a clownish way, But beyond that, I don't really think there was much basis for the ascendance of Trumpism. And what I think is glorious about the times in which we live is that we're seeing the unraveling of Trumpism as an ideology. I mean, his whole protectionism thing is coming and falling apart. I mean, the resentment in the farming states and the revolt among the merchant class is very intense against Donald Trump and the protections. And the U.S. is losing its trade routes already. A couple of days ago, Trump has made a bid to get back into the TPP because China and Australia and New Zealand and Malaysia and all these countries are coming to new trade agreements that exclude the U.S. And Trump's like, wait, well, what about us? You know, well, sorry, you decided to be an isolationist. Of course we're excluding you. Yeah, but yeah, maybe we ought to change our minds now, right? So he's coming to terms with his own contradictions. And since his protectionist program necessarily is going to lead to higher prices and taxes on his base, it's actually a very serious problem for him. It's not popular, it's not doing well. Somebody asked me today, well, but is he going to win the next time around? If he does, it will be such a tribute to the intellectual bankruptcy of the alternative. And for that reason, I think it will happen. I think it will. I mean, what does the left have to offer us anymore? I mean, a lot of great rhetoric, a lot of virtue signaling, you know, a lot of talk and ideals, but it really comes down to it. They want to raise your taxes and tell you what to do through regulations. I mean, that's it. That's all it is. It's pure intellectual bankruptcy. It's been tried and tried and tried for decades, dating back 100 years, their whole program. They cannot improve it. They're captive of special interests, and so they can't really change. They can't change the flavor that they're offering to the public, and it's going to be rejected. Yet again, I don't actually believe that they can win. And if you look at the trends over the Western world, whether it's in Europe or America over the last 40 years, and you look at the status of social democratic parties, it's gone down and down and down and down and down. They're a peculiar mix of welfare statism, high taxes, virtually signaling about diversity, open borders, plus attempting to create a kind of a family-style nation state where everybody regards each other as a neighbor, which are two totally incompatible ideas. The left is by itself in a process of self-emulation, emulation, I guess I'm trying to say. Like they're burning themselves up, or defenestration. They're hurling themselves out the window. There's no future for these people, is what I'm saying. It's an intellectually bankrupt paradigm, and they can't do it. I tell you why we needed Donald Trump. We needed Donald Trump so that we could really live through the failure of a right-wing collectivist alternative to left-wing collectivism. I mean, we needed to see the left fail, and we needed to see the right fail. So the question is, you know, what happens when we're living in a time when both paradigms, which are strangely similar in a funny way, because they're both united on the need for total government control. What happens when both paradigms are shattered and a new one's being created? I think what you get is a world of competing power structures where no one's able to get power. And I think that that's a good thing. In other words, we shouldn't regret that. We should actually celebrate every leftist attack on Trump and every rightist attack on Elizabeth Warren and the bunch on the left. I mean, they're right about each other, essentially. And that's a good thing. We need competitive power structures. Now, if that sounds to you like chaos, I actually don't. Well, let me put it another way. I don't think chaos is a bad thing in this case. You want the people who are competing for power to tear each other apart. So long as they're doing that, they're leaving us alone. That's extremely important. Because, and this gets actually to the core of my talk. Competing power structures. Humankind, as far as we know, has been around 150,000 years. Liberty has existed for a very short period of time in that process. where did it come from and why did we get it? Essentially, it was born out of the High Middle Ages in a vicious competition between central states and local states and churches vying with barons and lords over power. When the competition grew too tight and too costly, especially in the religious wars of the 15th century, what we saw was a peace being made. Guys, how about we stop killing each other over a unified theory of what society should be and where it should go, and just let people believe whatever they want. So if you want to be a Protestant, be a Protestant. If you want to be a Catholic, be a Catholic. If you want to believe in some weird amalgam like Anglicanism, Episcopalianism, consubstantiation and so on, you can do that so long as you let other people be alone. Let's try that system out for a little while and see how it goes. We're talking about the 16th century in Europe. And you know what? It was a glorious thing. It actually worked. The less you attempt to control society from the top, the better society works. Everyone weirdly gets happy and things get done. And it was glorious. And that was the birth of the idea of liberalism as we know it today, or libertarianism essentially, which is just simply the idea that if you let people alone to do what they want, so long as they don't hurt other people, you're going to get better social outcomes than you will ever get if you assign a ruling class that's highly intelligent and very resourceful with a ton of power to badger everybody and tell people what to do. That's not going to work. So this is essentially the idea of liberalism. It was born out of the religious wars and an end to the religious wars, and damn it, it worked, and it was glorious. And so gradually, over the centuries, this liberal idea began to unfold, and we tried it in a number of areas like speech, like the press. And then we tried it with trade, and then we tried it with entrepreneurship, and every time there was a new experiment in freedom, the results were ever more glorious. And that system produced everything that's beautiful in life. Like the state produced nothing that you love, liberty produced everything you love. It gave us long lives, it gave us technology, it gave us the ability to move, to even imagine the idea of human progress itself, so that you're born into a certain station in life, but maybe just you could get out of it and ascend to a different level. You can get richer, you could become somebody you weren't born to be. That notion, that progress that we take for granted today, is a product of liberal ideology or libertarianism. And so much else came out of that. It was liberalism and libertarianism that got rid of slavery in the world. It was resisted hard by both the left and the right. But we managed to get rid of it all over the world. And then the idea of acquiescing to the existence of women's rights, which came actually weirdly after the end of slavery. I mean, it's like the most controversial thing you could ever do. That was too born of the liberal idea. But where did it come from? It came about because the initial problem was presented to the world. There's so many people that want to control the world, and all they're doing is fighting with each other. How about we just don't let anyone win and just let people be free, right? So that's the idea. So you need this, this is a precondition for the establishment of liberty. Competitive power structures. People struggling with each other. I want to rule. No, I want to rule. No, I want to rule. And finally, people like those of us in this room stand up and say, you know what? How about we have a different system? Nobody's in charge. Nobody gets to win, all right? That's what we need to say to the world today. Because we've got the left and the right and the media and the churches and various levels of governments all fighting with each other. Let me just give you a quick example of that, what we have here in the US. We're seeing an increased divergence between state laws and federal laws. You notice this? I mean, like all over the place. It's California with their sanctuary laws over immigration or marijuana laws, or Colorado and its marijuana laws. Georgia's passing all kinds of laws with regard to taxation and schooling that's subtly contradicting federal law. And we're coming to blows increasingly. A very interesting thing is happening in Wyoming right now. They passed a series of legislation that creates something like a crypto utopia for Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies in Wyoming, defining a utility token in such a way that would bypass SEC regulations. I mean, these things are going to come to a conflict in the future. And I don't know what's going to happen, but I think it's very, very exciting. The unitary state that the old-fashioned progressives from Madison, Wisconsin in the early part of the 20th century imagined was going to happen, it has utterly and completely failed. And I don't think it can last, precisely because of this. Competing power structures. The second factor that I think is leading to the decline and fall of the state is technological change. I'm very interested in cryptocurrency and Bitcoin. And that is because my entire life, people said it could never happen, it could never exist. You cannot create a money out of nothing. You couldn't just make a new money. Whatever monetary reforms we're going to have, they've got to be built out of the dollar. Guess what, my friends? In 2009, we saw the birth of a new currency, Bitcoin, made purely of code, not invented by the Federal Reserve, or approved by the US Treasury, or printed by the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, or even advocated or explained by a single professor at any Ivy League university. It was a product of a bunch of cypherpunks, most of whom don't have names, and shared on a free email list and distributed anonymously by a guy who we don't even know, for open distribution on the internet to make a new money that 10 months later turns out to have actually worked, a new money that was disconnected from the nation state and from the banking system entirely, a new money that provided not only a store of value and a unit of count and of the ability to facilitate trade, but also that magical thing that nobody ever imagined it could be part of money, which is a built-in payment system. An actual innovation, like we've never seen anything like it, emerging spontaneously with no central planning whatsoever. This, from the point of view of the ruling class monetary and financial elites, is the worst nightmare. It's inconceivable that something like this could happen. In fact, they were in denial for years about it. Years. Oh, it's a Ponzi scheme. That's a bubble's going to break. It broke. Yeah, there are many bubbles. We keep getting a bubble, and then it gets bigger. But yeah, I know. I've been through so many of these things, right? Oh, 70% drop, 80% drop, 90% drop. Well, so it gets higher in the end. And it doesn't actually, the price doesn't matter. What matters is the technology. And now we're seeing this technology being unfolded in new areas, not just creating new monies without banks, monies without states, monies without borders, but also law and contracting systems and systems of venture capital and raising and tokenizing businesses. Imagine a world in which anybody with a good idea can float a token and invite the whole world's population to invest in it. Right? It sounds like utopia. It is. And it's being born right now. And it's scary. And I can just tell you this, because I was just yesterday playing with the Lightning Network, which is an off-chain solution for transactions from the Bitcoin core. I just can't imagine a scenario under which the existing state apparatus can ever control this. I don't know how else to put it to you. Let me just state it that way. I don't believe it can ever be controlled. It's too fast, it's too agile, it's too global, it's too non-physical, and it's too opaque and too easy to, it's just not part of the old world. It's just not. The government's really good at controlling the old world, not very good at controlling the new. Technological change is everything. I think it's going to be a way that we unravel the state. And in fact, you can look back at history and see that technology has always represented a setback to the existing ruling class, whether it's the crossbow, or electricity, or internal combustion. Innovations always do, but there's something very, very special about innovations in the digital world because it's a different paradigm. I invite you to walk out of this hotel and look at what my Uber driver called that building, the Capitol building, and examine why it is that it looks like it does. It's a very strange building, right? I mean, it's kind of like a church. Big dome, huge, massive, it's a massive structure, huge dome. Oh my God, look at that thing reaching up into the sky. Who's that gold lady on the top? You know, so, like sent from the gods down to bless this great architecture. And the gigantic columns, my God, what stability, what seriousness, what intelligence must be embedded in that building. The entire structure of not just the Capitol building in Madison, which is actually unusually beautiful, but all the Capitol buildings in this country are designed to intimidate and celebrate power and celebrate the sheer physicality of that power and its possession and ownership over a territory. That's the symbol. It's really interesting that government finds it necessary, has always found it necessary to build these kind of buildings. But if government were really good, it could just be like an application on your phone. You'd be opening it as much as Facebook Instant Messenger, right? I mean, government sucks so badly that they have to build these gigantic structures to impress you. You know, to make you go, oh my God, it must be amazing. I mean, government must be awesome. Look at that place, you know? Well, guess what? It's an illusion, and it can be wiped out very easily, and it's especially in light of the technical innovations of our time. And I don't mean just Bitcoin, I mean just the pace of information. And I wrote a book about this in 2000, I guess it was 2009, called It's a Jetsons World, about how the internet was ultimately going to dismantle the nation state, and I think it's absolutely true. Okay, the third reason I don't believe that the state is long for the world, at least the total state that we know, is this constant appearance of anomalies. And if you read something like Thomas Kuhn's book on structure of scientific revolutions, actually, if you read it, maybe just like gently put up your hand if you've ever read Structure of Scientific Revolutions. Okay, it's a very interesting book. He asked the question, why is it that as a culture we stop believing in one paradigm and start believing in another one? Like what causes that shift? And it is a shift. It's not gradual. It's not just like a linear change gradually through time. We've always gone through, as far as science has been around, episodic, dramatic changes. Like everybody says, hey, well, you know, that old theory, it really super sucks. Anybody got a new idea? Okay, here's a new idea. And we adopt that one. That's the way science is typically changed. Not through gradual learning, but episodic panics, like our old way is terrible, what's the new way? So what's the trigger that leads to these big changes? They're anomalies. When the theory that you have contradicts the reality constantly, unrelentingly, unfailingly, that paradigm can't last. That's what we're living through right now with statism in general. And I don't know, you could point to so many things. You know, we built the post office to be awesome at delivering us mail. Now nobody wants to use it for anything anymore. And that's just nothing but like, look at what's happened to our medical system since Obamacare, for example. Like, I don't know anyone who's happy with the situation in medicine anymore. That was the system, when Obama passed that, the idea was to bring fairness and justice and equality and access to everybody at low prices. I mean, what we got instead was enormous high prices, endless waits, Now insurance companies, we didn't have doctors anymore. Insurance companies run absolutely everything. I remember only just 10 years ago when I got sick, I would go to the doctor. I don't know how many of you did this, but I did. I used to go to the doctor. Now the idea of going to the doctor is absolutely terrifying to me. Like, first of all, you're gonna have to wait 2 hours. And then, God forbid, something's actually fundamentally wrong with you besides just getting a Z-Pack or something like that, because you don't know what you're going to be caught for. My medical insurance is great, but I mean, I could just get absolutely pillaged. And nor do you want to be part of the system where the doctor's not even allowed to talk to you for liability reasons, and the insurance company determines everything that happens to you and what's being paid. I mean, it's a catastrophically terrible system. I don't believe it's sustainable. I also believe it's going to be the last big welfare program that's ever passed in American history. That, more than anything else, discredited the Obama presidency and probably led to the election of Donald Trump. But these anomalies of statism are everywhere. I personally don't know anybody anymore who likes government. I just don't. I know that there's something that reportedly there are 13% of Americans who have confidence in the government, 13%. I've never met these guys. Maybe they'll work for the government, I don't know. Actually, that's not true. You know anybody who works for the government, they hate the government, actually. They more than anybody else. By the way, that figure in 1963, how many people expressed in 1963 had confidence in government to do the right thing? Do you know what it is? It was 2/3. It's about 65% of Americans. Today it's 13%. My friends, that's a dramatic change. I don't think that the system can survive this level of public opposition. It's not coherent, it's not well formed, but it's there. It's inchoate and it's there. And it's part of, I think, like government simply can't survive without some level of cultural assent to what's doing. Which leads to my fourth point, non-compliance. Now this is a sensitive topic, but we are brave people in this room, and we're honest people, and we don't report what the speaker said to the press. So I'm just going to talk about this very bluntly. Why did prohibition end in this country? It ended because of non-compliance, because people said, screw you to the state. You know, they said, we're not going to do it. And it brought it down. I mean, if you get mass non-compliance with edicts from the government, at some point it becomes impossible to enforce it. I mean, it's what Martin Luther King, considered to be, peaceful resistance, peaceful non-compliance, but it's more than that. It really is a willingness to step out and take the risk of doing something you're not supposed to do. And when that takes place on a mass level, the nation state and the police state cannot survive it. I mean, think back to 1972 when Richard Nixon made his announcement concerning marijuana. He got on national television and said that he was going to get rid of it completely. He was going to wage a war on drugs and drive pot out of national life through sheer enforcement power. Incredibly, I think our new Attorney General said something very similar not too long ago. But it's laughable. It's laughable. I mean, we all know where we're going. We're going to decriminalization in this country. But just keep in mind that it's happening not because of anybody in charge. It's happening because of resistance from below. We can work with this. Think of ways in your own life that you can decline to comply. I'm not asking you to take excessive risks. I have too many friends of mine who have spent an inordinate amount of time behind bars, and I myself have been in jail twice, I'm proud to say. There's my street cred. Thanks, yeah, thanks. I asked this in Brazil, I said, how many of you have been to jail? Like 2/3 of the audience raised their hand. Wow, that's cool. What did I do? Oh, yeah, it's always traffic for me. Well, I mean, the first time it was failure to appear, you know. Don't fail to appear.
Fail to appear.
Fail to appear.
Fuck the state.
And the second one was failure to fill out the right form or something. I don't know. And yeah, the cops came on. I mean, the first time I got arrested, it was tragic. You know, the second time was kind of funny. But yeah, you get kind of used to it over time. You know.
Yeah, I've been there, done that.
Yeah. Yeah. But look, non-compliance is worth something. And wow, how deep do I want to go into this? How should I say this? Okay. Yeah, I can't take the risk, so I'm not going to say what I was going to say. But I will say. Oh well. All right. Okay. All right. I'm just going to speak abstractly. All right. Some other time, some other place, some other state, some other people. All right. Let's say there was a state and a people somewhere, and everyone paid their taxes all the time, and it was glorious because the government owned the money, and they knew exactly where it was. And these same people invented a new system under which it was a different money entirely, and the state couldn't find it. That state would have to do without, at some point. The tax state could actually come to an end. So, I'll leave you that little story and relate it to no particular aspect of our present reality. Okay. Non-compliance. All right. I'm just going to parse it. Point 5. And this is where it gets interesting, because so far everything I've told you about the end of the total state as I see it, the dissolution of power in our time, which could happen tomorrow, might take 10 years, but it's happening. The dissolution has relied on technical factors and workability factors and conditions related to competitive powers and other features of our time that are all of which are interesting, none of which yet have anything to do with ideology, right? And yet most of us in this room are libertarians because we believe that we need to convince others of things like the non-aggression principle or the case for liberty in general. And I think this is correct. And I say this because I'm constantly haunted by this generation of libertarians, libertarians in the Gilded Age of the United States and in the UK from the 1880s and the 1890s, that generation who had lived to see free markets and capitalism give us things like flight and indoor heating and internal combustion, and invent the telephone to give us geographically non-contiguous communication for the first time since the invention of the smoke signal. I mean, it was a glorious time in where lifespans were growing and immigrants were coming and the incomes were rising and people were leaving their farms and moving to the cities and getting jobs, and people were making choices about who they could marry, and it was a glorious time in history. Infant mortality was collapsing. And when I think about infant mortality, I don't even understand what history was like in Adam Smith's time, when 3 out of 5 kids, never made it to the age of 2. I don't know what that world would look like. I don't know what it was like to be a family member, to be a father, to be a husband, to be a woman with one child, knowing that for every one child, 3 had died. I just don't know what that was like. So the improvement in child mortality in the late 19th century must have given people an overwhelming sense of progress. But you know what happened? It's very interesting. That whole generation of liberal, libertarian intellectuals, all of whom were against the fascists, they were against the socialists, they knew they were there, but they didn't believe that they were a threat. They thought, and it was obvious to them, that we had discovered the recipe, the ingredients, the path to permanent peace and prosperity for the whole of human history, for all time. What was it? It was the end of the monarchs, the end of the autocrats, the end of the dictators. It was the empowerment of the individual, the unleashing of private wealth and commerce and trade. That was the path to permanent peace, the end of the feud, the end of national rivalries, and so on and so on. They knew, and they thought that everybody else understood, that this is the path to progress, and they believed that they didn't have to work for it because they believed their victory was inevitable. This was what you find reading all of our friends from the late 19th century, the people who agree with this. They thought that liberty was inevitable. And it's very interesting to me, the minute that they stopped working hard for it, stopped explaining for it, they started just taking it for granted and thinking it was somehow baked into the path of history. It was that morning, that very moment, when the enemies of liberty seized control from the left and from the right, and within a blink of an eye, we got terrible, terrible things happen to us, terrible things. Compulsory schooling and the universal public education, labor legislation and minimum wages, immigration controls, marriage licenses, income taxes, central banks, welfare states, and then, oh my God, who could believe it, the first total war in the history of humanity, World War I, shattered and destroyed the liberalism that took centuries to build. In the blink of an eye, pow, boom, it was all gone. And the 20th century, the age of the total state, was born. And I think, and I'm not just speaking for myself here, but other people agree with this, that the libertarians bear some responsibility for this because we got lazy, because we came to believe it was inevitable. I'm very optimistic about the future. I think we have an opportunity. One paradigm is shattering, it's fallen apart. If it's not already fallen apart, it's happening already. We're entering into a pre-paradigmatic stage. The world's asking the question, if Obama sucked and Trump sucked, if the left is terrible and the right is terrible, if I don't want your welfare states and I don't want your protectionism, if I don't want your drug wars or your wars on alcohol and if I don't want any of this stuff, what can we do? We have to be out there with a voice that says, how about you just let society alone to develop on its own? Let individuals live their lives commercially, and religion, and speech, and what they ingest into their bodies, who and how they love other people, their family arrangements, where they live, where they move, with whom they do business. Let's leave it to other people. That constitutes a radical and crazy ideological vision that I happen to believe is very inspiring and very beautiful, and I think it's extremely persuasive. But it's not intuitive to most people. Most people believe you have to have control. It's up to us to explain otherwise and to make the case and to live in a way that illustrates our principles. So how does this take place? In other words, I don't think we can ever neglect ideological and philosophical education, agitation, and propagation. I don't think so. Even if we have the best technology, even if the ruling class has failed in all of its iterations, even if it's time for the old paradigm to be shattered and go away, even if the masses of people despise the state, there's still something missing, and that is a genuine and true, convicted, morally based love of human liberty as an idea. That's what we don't have yet. That's what I think we have to work on. How do we do it? There are many ways, so many ways, and I think I can't tell you because only you know your life and the way it works and who you get in contact with and what your specialties are and what you're good at. I do think the Libertarian Party has an extremely important role here. Because on an ongoing basis, people are asking the question, well, that's a very interesting idea, but what does it mean from an electoral standpoint? What does it mean in politics? Americans are political people, we're political people. Unless the idea is instantiated in some kind of political alternative, it's very easy to dismiss it as if it didn't exist. Murray Rothbard, my old friend, opposed the Libertarian Party when it was initially proposed, because he said, oh, that's a terrible idea, because then if people, if it doesn't win elections, people are going to say, oh, libertarianism has failed. But then he changed his mind. And he began to see that the Libertarian Party had a very important, highly educational and cultural role. It should be a real political party, he believed, but it should also mainly just stand for something. Just be the one group out there that's upholding morality, truth, and principle, and spreading an ideal. And that presence alone can make a huge difference. And I know this most recent election, I think it made a gigantic difference to have Gary Johnson out there. And that's why I spoke for him and why I introduced him at rallies. And I saw that just having him on the podium to offer a third way, it inspired people and brought a lot of new people into the movement. And I think that's an extremely powerful thing we need to do. And of course, we have now access to media like we've never had before. And I just, you can't exaggerate just how important this is. I was just on a radio show a couple of days ago, the Jason Stapleton program. I don't know if you've ever listened to it. Did you listen to the Jason Stapleton program? Okay. It's out of California. It's a really good show. And the reason I knew about it was because I have a home assistant, right? And like a Google Home Assistant. And somebody told me, oh, you should listen to Jason Stapleton. I said, okay. So I said to my Google Home, I said, hey, Google, play Jason Stapleton. Boom, within a couple of seconds, I'm listening to the podcast. I'm listening to Jason Stapleton. I'm suddenly realized, you know what? This one podcaster in Los Angeles is just as powerful in my life right now as CNN, New York Times, Fox News, or anybody else. It's amazing the way technology has democratized our access to information. I mean, that's revolutionary and powerful. So I immediately got a plane and got on the show. I just had to be on that show. It was just fantastic. This is where we're going. I love to see this level of chaos breaking out. And I mean that in a good sense. We need to shatter the existing paradigm and introduce a new level of chaos. So what can you do in your life? You've heard enough advice today, and I don't need to be one to give you more. But I will tell you this from my own experience. In education over the years, 3 things. The first one is never write anyone off. No matter how terrible you think their views are on anything, never write anybody off. People's minds are adaptable, and they can change, and they can change under your influence. Wait till they say something you can agree with, jump on that, work with it. You've got to be friends. Be friends with people. And I mean this, across the board. Make friends. No matter how lefty or how far right they are and how repulsive you find their views, figure out a way to be friends with people. Don't write people off. Don't make enemies unnecessarily. I'm of the belief that every human being on the planet is an instinctive libertarian, and I think it's up to us to find that within people. The second thing I would say is to So yeah, never write anybody off. Never give up a chance to promote your ideology. If you're confident about what you believe, you shouldn't be shy about it. If you're shy about it, it means that you might need to do more reading and more study. We have a beautiful and philosophically robust paradigm. It's intellectually firm. It's both moral and workable. There's nothing that should make you shy about proclaiming yourself to be a libertarian, about celebrating your attachments to these ideas. Even if you say something shocking, don't worry about it. You should have confidence. If you lack confidence, it's time to get back to work. Have confidence, be bold in your ideas, and never shy away from telling the truth. Sometimes that's all that's necessary, is just some one person saying the truth. That's what Murray used to do to me. You know, when I first became friends with him, I wasn't a libertarian at all, you know? And he would shock me with his opinions, and they would rattle me. And it'd take me a day or a week or even sometimes years to come around to his views. That's sometimes what it takes. The third point, sometimes in politics you can get really down, you can get really depressed, and you can get overwhelmed with hatreds, you know, like hatred of war, hatred of injustice, hatred of the criminal justice state, and hatred of all the terrible things the government does to us. And I get that, but I warn you against it. It's not a good way to live. Libertarians should be happy, hopeful, joyful people who genuinely love liberty. Liberty all around you. Find it, celebrate it, make it, like, if you're not a happy libertarian, you're doing it wrong. That's what I would suggest to you. Otherwise, you're going to burn out. Find the thing that you love about what you do as a libertarian. Cling to that. Then your light will shine. Then you will attract others. And you'll make a difference. My friends, this country needs you right now. The country needs the Libertarian Party of Wisconsin. As I said in my introduction earlier today, the total state was born in this town, in Madison. I think it can die in this town. I think it can be the basis of the future. Thank you very, very much for inviting me tonight.
Thank you for watching, and if you'd like to support videos like this, please check out the donation link inside the description.